presenting, I got into the middle of what is my longest running case, somebody I've been with for more than 5 decades. And it is a case that illustrates many, many things that therapists don't ordinarily do. And the passport into this case was this was the first case in which my giving an airplane ticket to somebody was in a significant attempt to make a difference in their life. Previously, I presented the other case where I gave an airplane ticket to a client, and that didn't lead to the kind of outcome I had hoped. As a matter of fact, it may have exacerbated my losing the client. But this one had a different outcome and was quite resonant, and I will get there eventually. At the time I am discussing, I am into the client's life. He's in his 40s now, and he has recently lost his wife to the exigencies of damage that have been done to us done to her by cancer treatment, leaving her with very scarred blood vessels and very scarred parts of her lungs from all the radiation she had in her chest, and eventually resulted in a catastrophic asthma attack that took her to the ER, and she could not recover from it and actually died. So my client was disconsolate. He came back to see me again. Well, he came back when she got diagnosed and had to be rushed to the ER, and I kept him company while she died. He even asked me to if I would be willing to give a eulogy at her funeral, and I did. I had worked with them as a couple. He had kept me informed over the years when he would show up in my office about what was happening between the two of them. I always found her really quite a worthwhile, quite a brave and interesting human being. And I was happy to participate at their funeral. That's a thing therapists don't do very often either, is give eulogies for somebody who's died at funerals. But I did that for him. It was important to him that I do it. He was afraid he couldn't speak because he would just break down in tears, and he knew I would hold it together and I would be able to say some meaningful words. So he leaned on me in a way. After that, he came. He wanted to try and work through what it meant to be a single parent, to deal with his grief. And I think I wound up last week saying that in the waiting room one day, there was a woman about contemporary age who was sitting in the waiting room, and he noticed her on the way out, and she looked like a pleasant person. And he had asked me, did I mind if he dated her? And he wanted my permission. I got into this wonderful, strange back and forth with him. Why does he need my permission? He was being sensitive to me. Is there anything in the ethics processes of our profession that says he shouldn't date my client? Will this cause me any practical difficulty? So we visited these topics together, and I steadfastly refused to tell him whether he had my permission or didn't have my permission to take her out. I left that on him. And eventually he did. After fumfying for 2 or 3 visits, and they came at the same times. That's when they were in my schedule. He saw her every time he left after that, and he always stopped, talked to her for a little while, and then left again. Finally, he did say, could he have her phone number and would she go out with him? I don't know if I got to the point last time we were talking where I mentioned that she was seeing me for grief counseling. She was the wife of the very obese man I had talked about, who weighed close to 500 pounds and who died on the operating table trying to get a stomach stapling operation. She was in mourning herself, lost and confused. She had 2 small children, ages 6 and 9, and she was now a single mother, having to figure out how to support them because she didn't have his pension and his disability money to live on anymore. She had to go back to work. All of it was very stressful for her. She felt guilty too because she had failed him somehow. She had not helped him to take the weight off, and or she had not succeeded in talking him out of trying to go for surgery when the risks of surgery were so high because of his obesity. So I had plenty of work to do with her, but she seemed to find my client pleasant and agreed to go out with him. And they started to see each other more and more frequently. And he started to go over to her house and to meet her children. And they tried to mix his children with her children too on some occasions. They were in a kind of trial run. Was it possible to create a step family that would be well functioning for everybody, be kind and good to everybody, and help everybody to heal and get on with life from the death of two parents, the male parent, her family, and the female parent, his family? Well, it didn't go well when the 4 kids were together. There was usually bickering. The uh, the children of my male client, who is the focus of my attention in this presentation, resented the fact that he was dating. They did what many adolescent kids wanted. They wanted him to build a shrine to his mother, to their mother in his heart, and never again to engage with any other woman. Their mother had been a splendid, special person, and he was not to move on, forget about her, and replace her with anybody. And they were making it clear to him if he tried to have another woman come live with him, they would make the other woman miserable. They were going to punish her for what their father was attempting to do to them. Her children were much more welcoming. They were younger. By the way, these tendencies, I think, are quite common. Adolescent kids have harder time allowing a step parent to come into their life. They've been more used to the rituals, and there's a secret going on too. They don't like it that their parents are sexual beings. They're struggling with their own sexuality and how to master it, and the idea that dad and mom, or dad and stepmom, or mom and stepdad are going to be screwing in the bedroom, and that horrible thing is going to be happening there is very hard on them. So they would prefer that a vow of celibacy be engaged in for the rest of their parents' lives. That was a big fly in the ointment. It was an iguana in the ointment. At any rate, my client was brave and he proposed that they should start living together, and they would struggle with what to do with his children if his children remained problematic. And I then had a new task. The task was to do family therapy with the 2 people who were struggling to get married and with the 4 children. And the best I could do was to get some acknowledgement from his children that he had a right to a new life, and it was unreasonable of them to expect that he would just martyr himself to celibacy until they died or decided that maybe it was okay for him to move on. They didn't get to decide how he was going to live. They came to agree that stepmom had been decent to them and kind. She could do that would be helpful to them. She had tried to woo them in whatever way possible. She clearly was not awful and poisonous and terrible. And they moved into sort of like a Cold War. It was not, nobody was firing at anybody, but they were excusing themselves and going to their own rooms, and they were not interacting. They were turning down invitations to go off as a family as much as possible, and they were spending time in other people's households too. So spending time with friends rather in the house that was shared by 4 children and 2 step parents. But that was okay. They limped through adolescence doing that, and I thought that might be okay. And as things calmed down, and as the step family didn't become a wonderful family, but became at least a tolerable, functional family, I stopped seeing him again. That ended the next episode of therapy. The purposes had been achieved. The next thing that happened is he had a terrible heart attack and he almost died. That came 3 years after we stopped working as a step family. And he was scared. I visited him in the ICU, and then he worried now what's going to happen to his children. Are they going to agree to stay with stepmom? He had no other family. What the hell was going to happen? He was full of apprehension. And I said, well, the most important thing is don't die. That's the best solution to the problem. Come on, get it back together again. And he had a quadruple bypass surgery done on him. He agreed to go through all of that. Jesus Christ, they stripped out all the veins in one of his leg practically and patched together a whole new circulatory system. And he was grimly dedicated. He was going to live. He did the rehab they wanted him to. He went to physical therapy. He went to rehab. He walked. He started to walk more and more and more and more. Then he started even running some, and he healed pretty well and got reasonably sturdy again from this close brush of death he had. And I said goodbye to him. He came back 3 years later. He had kidney cancer. And at some point in the story, you'll hear I told him he needed to read the book of Job. Uh, I never heard anybody as afflicted of this. When they went in to repair the kidney cancer, they discovered he had bladder cancer too. And so the bladder cancer was early on. It was probably a metastasis from the kidney cancer. They had to remove one of his kidneys and they took out part of his bladder, but he had enough left to be able to function. And he healed from that too. He had radiation, he had chemotherapy, and the systems were working. He seemed to have adequate kidney functioning with only one kidney. Well, we know that there seems to be a reasonable redundancy with kidneys, and most people for a long period of time can get along with only one. It doesn't interfere with their life at all. And his bladder had healed well. He didn't have to have any permanent catheter, or they didn't have to try and reconstruct an artificial bladder for him. He recuperated from that, and things were moving again in a reasonable fashion. Now he was coming into his 50s, and he said goodbye to me again. His kids had grown up and left home. I went to his daughter's wedding, as a matter of fact. He invited me to come. And then he had another twist in his life. His boy, his male son, in his late 20s, came out of the closet and told him he was gay. And that made for difficulty because the woman he had married was a born-again Christian, and now there was a gay stepson. My client had been exceptionally gracious and magnanimous to her. She told her her faith in Jesus was very important to her. Would he go to church with her a few times a month at least? And so he can see how important her faith was to her. She promised she would not actively try to proselytize him. If he decided there was something in the faith that he could resonate to, it would of course bring her great joy, but she was not going to nag him. She knew he was Jewish. As a matter of fact, she wanted to learn all about Judaism, and for the sake of his children, she celebrated all the Jewish holidays in her household, cooked all the traditional dishes. She was very forthcoming about that and very accepting. She didn't hate or resent Jews. She did hate homosexuals, unfortunately. So that was a matter of tension. And he went to church with her. He said sometimes he felt like he was going to fall asleep, but he tried to stay awake. And the pastor was always very nice, very welcoming, very glad to see him. And in some ways, he developed the kind of nice, I won't call it a friendship, but an acquaintanceship with the pastor, who was always would give him a hug and tell him how happy he was that my client was there. So on we move. We made some kind of contentious peace with the gay child. And I thought, all right, this is the last episode of therapy I'm going to have. He's getting on. And he comes in again and he tells me he had a problem he never thought he would have. What is the problem? The woman he had married had Huntington's chorea and was going to die. And he said, I'm going to have to bury a second wife. And it was just horrible for him. And I'm going to have to finish raising my stepchildren alone. Uh, I can't imagine what some people have to live through. He read up on it. He studied the disease. Now some things were clear. She had a brother that was institutionalized early on with a diagnosis of schizophrenia, but I think it was a false diagnosis. I think he was losing his capacity to think as part of his Huntington's chorea. He wasn't schizophrenic at all. And I'm sorry she never got tested because the test was now on the market. If she had known that she was suffering from it or potentially suffering from it, I don't know what good it would have done. Maybe she would have planned her life differently because there's no cure for Huntington's chorea. So now I had a new challenge. I had to keep him company while he suffered. He tried very hard to keep a good face, to take care of her. He took off work frequently to stay home with her. He told her he was never going to put her in a place. She was going to stay at home as long as he could keep her there. He brought in help to watch over her. He made her special smoothies that she liked drinking. He tried to tempt her appetite with whatever he could. And he watched her slowly, slowly losing the capacity to walk, losing her balance, bumping into things, starting to slur words, starting to find it hard to get a fork from the plate up to her mouth as she was losing control over her musculature. And he had to make a decision that made him totally feel guilty. He couldn't keep her at home. He needed to put her in a skilled nursing facility, even with people coming in and the chaos of that. The children he found were suffering. Just seeing their mother was tormenting them. And he thought might be better if she was in a skilled nursing facility and they only had to visit her occasionally rather than keep bearing witness to what was going to happen on the way to the end. So he finally, with great difficulty, made the decision to place her in a skilled nursing facility. Fortunately, I knew a good one. We had taken very good care of my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, when she slipped into dementia, and we knew a very loving, very kind, very decent place. His wife was accommodating very well to what was happening to her. She knew that she was going to die and be with Jesus. She also believed that she had Jesus's company as she struggled with what she had to struggle with. And this was designed by Jesus for her to learn something. And in peace and gratitude, she just surrendered to her oncoming fate and lived it out. And finally, she died. He was miserable the last 3/4 of a year before she died. He was so lonely. Even in the early stages of her illness, they were still having sex together, and he loved the sex with her. It was really wonderful. They were very close. She was a very good sexual partner. She clearly loved being sexual and loved being sexual with him. So he was increasingly cut off from that. Finally, it disappeared entirely. And he was very lonely. He didn't like masturbating. He did it whenever it got to be too much for him, but he didn't like that. He wanted to be with a woman, but his moral standards would not allow him to go find a woman, even after a time when his wife couldn't recognize him anymore. And I said, are you sure you don't want to start looking for some female companionship? No, I can't do anything like that until she dies. So he steadfastly resisted doing that. And at last she died. I kept him company for a while. He didn't feel like dating yet. I told him when he was ready to start, come back and talk to me. He was going on as best he could, trying to comfort the stepchildren, trying to carry out his career, and trying to pay the bills that accumulated while had been ill. And then the next thing happened. He started to have angina pain again. And the doctor was worried about him, and he hadn't been taking good care of his health at all. And he was so believing. Oh, the other thing that was going on at the same time was that his business was beginning to turn downward. He made his living always as a mill representative for in the textile industry, selling velvet fabrics, and he made a good living, and he sold to furniture manufacturers, he sold to upholstery shops, and he sold to those stores that just sell fabric. So people come in and buy quantities of fabric for whatever projects they want fabric for. And he made a very good living and had managed to buy a very comfortable house for himself and the four children. Nice house in Santa Monica. And what was happening? The Chinese were coming on with a big rush starting in the late 1980s. The furniture manufacturing business was starting to take hits in the United States. Furniture manufacturers were going out of business. And the Chinese now were also beginning to manufacture fabric too, and they were starting to ship fabric to the United States and competing in the American market for fabric sales. And he could feel the annual take he had in commissions from his business declining slowly, and then starting to accelerate more. So as he's struggling with his angina, he's really worried about his future. What's going to happen? He had some money, but he didn't know if he had enough money to live without continuing to earn a living, and he was afraid the whole thing was going to go south in the next few years. And the angina pain started to get serious. He had what the hell's that procedure called where they put something up through one of the arteries and open it up again? He had that done to one of his arteries. That seemed to help some, but he was depressed. He was not exercising. He was overeating. He was eating comfort food and putting on weight. And I was worried he was going to have another heart attack and just die and give up. And I told him that. I said, I think you may be trying to commit suicide. And I said, I don't blame you. You've had a life full of so many horrible twists and turns. And every time you thought it was getting stabilized and it would get better, it got a little bit better. And then something even more awful happened to you over and over and over again. I don't blame you for losing your resiliency. But tell me this. Is there anything, maybe you're going to die, maybe you'll just decide to surrender, not fight it, and let death happen to you. And I think out of despair, death can come sometimes. But before you do that, is there anything you've always wanted to do that you still might do before you die? That would be very precious, and you would enjoy a lot if you're going to be saying goodbye to life. At least you will have done one delightful thing for yourself before you leave. And I said, would you think on that for a while and tell me? So he came in the next week and he said, well, ever since I was a little kid, I used to like, I couldn't afford to buy it, but I used to like going and looking at the National Geographic. And when I got old enough and I could have a subscription to the National Geographic, I like that. I particularly like the animal. And I know just like I'm going to become extinct, they may be becoming extinct too. So I would really like to go on safari. That would really be wonderful. He said, but I can't afford to go on safari. I don't have that kind of, it would cost thousands of dollars to go on safari. And that's where I thought of the airplane ticket intervention. I said, how about this? I'm not in a position to fund a wonderful safari trip for you, but I could do this. Suppose I gave you a first class round trip airline ticket to Johannesburg. I said, I'll get you to South Africa because there's plenty of safari business coming out of South Africa. You would have to pay for the lodgings and the safari activities itself, but I will treat you to that round trip ticket. And I think there's a stopover in Paris. I'll even treat you to one night's lodging in Paris where you have to change planes. Would you be willing to stay alive and go? I'll tell you there's a condition on my giving you your ticket. You're still having angina attacks, I said. I want you to start walking much more. I want you to lose 10 pounds, and I want you to be able to walk 3 miles without puffing and huffing and without feeling angina pains. If you can do that, I'll give you the ticket. And he thought, he said, gee, I have a very wealthy friend. Maybe he'd like to go. I said, that's fine. Take a friend with you. That would make it even better. That would be glorious. So he asked the friend if in about 4 months' time, when he got in better shape, the friend would like to go on safari with him. The friend was very happy to do it. And God damn it, he lost the weight. He started to walk. He got rid of the angina pain, and I gave him the airplane ticket. And he went, and he had a glorious time. And he brought back over 150 pictures he gave me of all kinds of animals and scenery and wonderful, wonderful memories. I still have a whole drawer full of his African pictures. And it did good things for his morale. He didn't feel like dying anymore. He said, I'm going to stay alive. So what am I going to do about my career? And I said, let me think. I said, I have an idea. I still have many thousands of frequent flyer miles. How about you go to Shanghai? I'll give you a ticket to Shanghai, and maybe you could become the representative for a Chinese mill, and not just the American mills you're working for that are closing all over the place. Maybe you could get in on the tide that's starting and represent the Chinese here in the United States. I have no idea whether they would trust a foreigner or whether it's even possible. But I'm sure if you wanted to visit the mills, the government will allow you to do that. And you'll have some conversations with people. Maybe it's possible. So I gave him a second ticket. I sent him to Shanghai. It didn't work out. He enjoyed the trip. He enjoyed the Chinese food, but it was terribly smoggy. He didn't like what they were doing to the environment. And the Chinese do not want an American in any significant position in the food chain of the manufacture to sales in the United States of goods here. They have their own people. They send people to the United States to be the outlets for their goods when they have goods to get rid of. And no, they weren't going to employ him for any reason. If he wanted to come, they would welcome him if he would come to China and start some part of the enterprise. If he himself wanted to open yet another mill or open some shipping capacity or open some intermediary where he was helping Americans buy goods in China. If he could think of a business that he could start in China and move to China, they would help fund him, and they would give him the preferred housing, and they would support him in any way possible, but it would require him to move to China. And he was not ready to separate that much from his children or his stepchildren who were just beginning to fly on their own. So that didn't come true. So my second airplane intervention was not harmful, didn't make anything bad happen, but it didn't achieve its objective. The first one worked beyond my fondest dreams. It gave him the will to live. It gave him a taste of the beauty of life that was important to him, that all was not dreary, no matter what horror he had lived through. So we stopped seeing each other for a while, and then he was back again. He had prostate cancer. Why am I laughing? I think that's the only thing I can do in the face of the horror of this story. How can so much that's awful happen to one person? You know, he's like the Boppo clown. You knock him down and somehow he bounces up ultimately and takes hold again. I'll take a little bit of credit for that. Having my companionship and that sense he's not in it alone. There's somebody else will keep him company and help him work his way through is probably fine. Well, he survived the cancer, and it was the last thing that he find. There were two last things he needed to do. He was right. His income started to go down markedly. And by 4 years ago, he was making only 25% of what he used to make. And he was worried, where is the money going to come from that's going to allow him to live? Because it looks now like he's not going to die soon. 5 years ago, he was what? He was going to be turning 78 5 years ago. He's now 83. And he said, I have to plan on maybe I'm going to live to be 100. How the hell am I going to make that happen? On the top of that, he was looking at probably $100,000 to $150,000 worth of deferred maintenance he was going to have to do on his property in Santa Monica. So I said, look, let me refer you to a money manager. You need somebody to take a look at your current circumstances, make some projections about the future, look at whatever money you've managed to put away that's liquid. And I think you're going to hear the way forward is to sell your house, because it's worth a lot and it's gone up a lot. And there may be enough cash that comes out of your house that you don't have to worry for the rest of your life. But you're going to probably have to live in much smaller space. Your kids are grown now and out of the house. Anyhow, it's only you in that 4-bedroom house. You may have to be in a 1 or 2-bedroom apartment for the rest of your life and deal with landlords and apartment managers and be a nomad a little bit, moving from apartment to apartment. But I think there's enough money so you don't have to be frightened, at least, but you'll find out. So he did the analysis, and sure enough, that was the solution. Now, as he's putting his house on the market, I have a duplex and a garage apartment. The garage apartment is our offices, and the bottom half of the duplex is where I've always had a tenant. I had a particularly obnoxious, difficult, unpleasant tenant. I wanted to get rid of her, and I wanted to get rid of her husband. I was looking for their lease to be up, and I had had several other bad experiences with tenants over the years. And Daryl needs an apartment, and I know him well. Why don't I make Daryl my tenant? This is a terrible thing for a psychologist to do, to get into a dual relationship with a client and have a client you're doing psychotherapy with become your tenant. But I was prepared to give him a break and rent the apartment a little below market in term for a long-term lease. And I thought, this is really important for me. I'm going to be turning 85 and then 90 in the near future. I have a wife who's turning 80 and then 85. There are three of us elderly people. She knows him. She likes him. She's run into him. I've talked about him. It's like having a dear friend. I've known him for over 50 years, for God's sakes. It's like having a dear friend as my tenant. And when it's time for one of us to die, there'll be two people to comfort each other when one of us dies, whoever it is. And that would be really good for us, for our future too. So I made him a proposal. I said, I'm come look at the apartment and tell me if you think you'd be comfortable here, because we would welcome having you, and you can't be my client anymore. I said, I'm just not going to do that. That gets too dicey and too complicated, and I don't want to exploit you. I don't want to have bad feelings about you as a tenant and have it influence what I do as a landlord, and I don't want to have bad feelings about you as a landlord, so I'm not going to raise the rent on you when it's time to raise the rent. I just want you to be my tenant, but I value your friendship. So I'll tell you what, we meet at 3:00 on Wednesday afternoons. We're going to continue to meet at 3:00 on Wednesday afternoons. You're not going to pay me anything because you're fully going to become my friend. I'm going to tell you whatever's on my mind, in addition to whatever it is you want to talk to me about. We're going to have a guaranteed friendship for at least an hour a week, and we'll probably start doing social things together too. But that's going to be sacred time. You don't have to worry about losing your access to me, so that I'll pay attention to whatever you're struggling with for at least an hour a week. And that's the bargain that's been in place ever since. He is my friend. He is my tenant. He is some kind of strange client. And it's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I think I will end that story there. What a nice man. Oh no, there is an additional thing. He rallied himself and now he's engaged in yet another travail. He is trying to convince a woman who was his childhood sweetheart to get seriously involved with him. He is courting again. She comes over frequently. She's divorced. She has grown children. She's very leery about getting married again. She had a very tumultuous, unpleasant marriage with a drunk. And she's not sure she's willing to. He said, just come live with me. She has her own apartment building, a little one, 4 units in it. That's where she lives. She lives in one of the apartments. Her daughter lives in another one. He keeps saying, come live with me. You're leaving the apartment building to the daughter who's living there. Why don't you start turning responsibility over to her now and let her start managing it? She's living there, and you'll get some additional income from renting out the unit that you're living in. You can come live here with me. It's a 2-bedroom apartment. We have room for people to visit us. Any one of your kids can come and stay anytime they want. Any one of my kids comes here and stays with us sometimes. And please let's be fully partners. And she is wonderful too. We love going out to dinner with her. She's a terrific person. I wish she would get over her fear and timidity and join him fully. That would make me very, very happy. Then there'll be 4 of us to worry about the death of just one of us, not just only 3 of us. And she is delightful. She has a wonderful sense of humor. I'm sorry she's still so traumatized and so cautious as a result of what she went through with her former husband. That's one of my favorite sayings. We always punish the next person that shows up for what we lived through with the previous person, whether it's justified or not. All right, so that's my long, complicated tale that involves many people's lives and involves endless chapters of an unfolding story between me and my client. And the floor is yours for a while, and then I'll talk about something else.
It seems that, unlike most other clients, this client became a family member,
Yeah,
and then a friend.
yeah.
And in some ways, that I don't know if that was some sort of transcendence or what, but in some ways that he became all these things to you.
Yes.
And I want to know why.
And I want to know why not. I can't tell you why. I have no idea why.
Well, was there something about him that was so different? I mean, obviously, Arthur, you've seen hundreds of clients,
Yes.
and you haven't done this with them. But so why him?
Uh, 2 things occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that occurred to me was how startled I was. I thought I knew what I was getting into, that this was a very conservative, male privileged, autocratic male asshole who was making a woman miserable by needing to be the dictator of the household. And working with him was going to turn out to be very unpleasant. And I even wondered whether I'd be able to make any kind of inroads into how he thought about life or what his view of the relationship between men and women was. And much to my surprise, he turned out to be hungry for knowledge and very changeable and very malleable and very willing to try on new things and to learn. I found that admirable. That part of him was admirable. Also, I admired what he had done with his life. He had lost his own father, just like I had. His father had abandoned him. Like I had, he grew up in a house of women, but he grew up on the lip of poverty. And he was a child of the streets trying to not get killed by Latino gangs when he was in East Los Angeles. And I admired his resiliency and his ability to ride with the currents and rise above them and move on and rise up the socioeconomic ladder, find some way to go to college and graduate from college. He kept moving upward and becoming in better and better and better ways. I admired him. I thought he was an admirable human being. And in the face of all that was being hurled at him, he would somehow come back and rise above it again and move on. I haven't had another client who's done that. I haven't had another client had the miseries inflicted on him that he has, but certainly nobody. I used the metaphor at my 90th birthday party about how all of us are making a journey up a mountainside and the trail can get steep and difficult at times when nobody ever gets to the top. Well, he kept the journey going and he still is keeping the journey going. He didn't sell out. He didn't go sulk by the side of the journey, of the trail. He didn't decide to just die and forget about it. He is still climbing the mountain. He is wooing that woman with great ardor right now and with great cunning. So I find him an admirable human being.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's the Timex of people. He's unstoppable.
He's also very kind. He has a mantra he says about himself. His mantra is the Jew always pays. That means whenever he's with people and there's some expenses for something, he is the one immediately reaches for his wallet and will pull out the money to pay. He feels privileged to be wherever he is and he's willing to pick up the expense. He really will fight you hard if you're out with him and you try and get a check from him. And then he grumbles about it. I'm always paying for everybody.
You know, if you have someone who's in your life who's admirable, you you want to be with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I look forward to my time with him every week. And whenever we have a social engagement, either just with him or with him and his woman, or, oh, we invite him to Thanksgiving. And if he doesn't have an invite from members of his family, we include him in our family rituals too. And he likes my kids and they like him. And it's always a pleasure to have him around. He's fun to be with.
He's no longer, this is my client, this is my friend, this is my, you know.
Yeah, this is my most significant male other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
That's
right.
what he is.
Yeah. This is my brother.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. That brings tears to my eyes. When I was so miserable as a kid, I always thought it could be better if I had a brother too. We could be brothers in misery. So I've certainly been brothers in plenty of misery with him. Now he's brothers in misery with me. That's a very special category. Every one of us should have a brother in misery.
Yeah. But they say misery loves doesn't love company. Misery loves miserable company.
Yes, that's right.
Or maybe he's the brother that you never had.
She is the brother I never had. So what is the Board of Psychology going to do to me now? I don't believe I have harmed him with the
No.
twistings and turnings of our relationship. I think it would be a hard case to make that I've caused him irreparable harm by my stupid behaviors.
Give you a medal?
I gave him a medal. The inscription was, "The bearer of this prize has outdone Job in hand-to-hand combat." Oh, by the way, his health is very good. His cardiac physician said, "You're doing excellently. You don't have to come back for a year." His kidney functions are up where they should be, even though he's limping along on one kidney. He has, he had a small skin cancer on an eyelid that had to be removed. That was the worst thing that happened at the time of his annual review. Otherwise, everything was humming, and he's 85 years old now.
Is he grateful for you?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, and he loves his apartment. He said, "This is a very special place. I feel so good to be here. Even though it's smaller than the grand house I had, this feels like home to me, and I will be here for the rest of my life."
That's full service.
Everyone should have a client like him.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
we should have only clients like him.
You'd need a bigger building.
Oh, you mean the clients that turn into tenants?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No, I was just thinking of clients that are really a pleasure to work with and work hard and become and struggle and don't give up and are interesting, have interesting dilemmas that they bring to your attention. All our clients should be that way.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll stop now instead of starting something else. I think I may have talked about this on a previous occasion, but never as fully as I'm going to now. And it's reverberating in my life all this week. It is helping children with sleep disturbances by creating a protector animal. That's going to be the topic for next week. And what's just amazing me is I now have adults asking if I will create a protector animal for them, for their sleep disturbances at night. Maybe it will work with grown-ups as well as with children. I'm about to find out.
Should.
As I said to one of them, if we can get into what the critics of the creative process call the willing suspension of disbelief that's necessary to get lost in a movie or get lost in a novel or something, to get lost in some kind of mythology about the wondrous possibilities for change may require the willing suspension of disbelief and the putting aside of one's critical facilities for a while. All right, you're anticipating what I'm going to be talking about next week. Thank you for listening to. Oh, there's one thing I can clean up before I get off. There was one more unusual intervention that was on my list, and I haven't talked about it yet. It'll take me 30 seconds to talk about it. I had two clients. One was a female ER surgeon who became pregnant and had a child. And, I wonder what she's going through now with the COVID epidemic. Even back then, she had really a chaotic life. She was very dependent on trying to find some good childcare for herself because at any hour of the day or night, she may be trapped in the emergency room trying to do something with somebody or being called in to help out when there are too many people for the existing staff to deal with. So childcare was a critical need of hers. And her husband was a lawyer. She was an ER doctor. They had plenty of money, and they had burned through 3 or 4 nannies by the time the child was 18 months of age. They're very unsatisfying people, neglectful people, unpleasant people, rebellious people. She had had bad nanny experiences, and I had a woman who her daughter sent me to me. She had moved her mother here from New York, and her mother had come to live with her because her mother's career had been taken away. Her mother was 62 years old, and her mother had been a live-in nanny for a family on Long Island, a very wealthy family. And she had grown, she had gone when the first child was born, and she had lived there. The last child was leaving home to go to college at age 18, and they didn't want her anymore. And she tried to get another live-in job, and all the agencies said she was too old. She'd go out on interviews and nobody would hire her. And she was despairing. She had to give up her apartment and she had to come and be helpless and have her daughter take care of her. And she was humiliated. She hated it. And they were in great tension. The daughter was not able to be gracious. She would complain about her mother spent too much at the grocery store on food. This is a big burden for her to have to support her mother too. She would complain and grumble about how much it was costing to support her mother. She would tell her mother, "Go sell newspapers. Go do anything. Please start earning money." And the woman tried to get menial jobs and wasn't successful. So here, on the one hand, I have somebody who needs a nanny, and on the other hand, I had an out of work nanny on my hand. So I suggested they meet each other, and it worked. I was a good employment agency. She went to work for the family. Everybody was delighted. She moved out of the daughter's house and now had a bedroom with the family she was with. She liked them. The baby seemed to respond very well to her. The mother was very pleased with how she was raising her baby, and off they went into the sunset. I lost 2 clients. I stopped seeing the ER doc, and I stopped seeing the new nanny. So much for doing good work. But you're not supposed to do things like that. You're not supposed to be an employment agency if you're a therapist.
Sometimes the stars disalign, just align just right, and you can't ignore it.
Mhm. I've come to the conclusion if it's not illegal or immoral in some way, if we can think of something that might be helpful, we ought to at least explore it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right, it is time today. I will be back with you and protect your animals next week.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. See
Bye,
you both.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.